Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Happy 2024, everyone. This is our first webinar of the year. It is January 19th, and we're going to be talking about planning and zoning for battery energy storage systems. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the Q&A box, and I will do my best to answer those technical questions. If you have questions related to the presentation, again, type those in the Q&A box, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations during the designated Q&A. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 AICP CM credits and one of the sustainability and resilience credits. You can log them by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and there you can search either by the title or event number, both of which can be found on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And the very newest members of AICP have just been released. So for any of you on the line, congratulations. And if you have any questions about logging your AICP credits for the first time, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to walk you through it. Today's webinar is sponsored by a collaboration kind of hosted by the Sustainable Communities Division. You'll hear a little bit more about this collaboration from Carla in just a moment. If you are on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, things like that. And we record all of our sessions. We post them onto our YouTube channel. So head over to YouTube and type in Planning Webcast. We'll pop up along with our almost 500 recordings. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so that you get notified when new recordings are up and available for you to view. So again, if you have any questions, technical or questions for our panelists, just feel free to type them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end during the Q&A. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Carla, to kind of kick things off and frame things up.
Thank you, Christine. I'm Carla Ebenbach with Ebenbach Consulting based in Miami, Florida, and I'm chair of the APA Sustainable Communities Division. I'm happy to present today's session. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the series and encourage you to check out all of our offerings. The series was created to provide opportunities for planning professionals to broaden and deepen their knowledge while allowing them to earn the AICP Sustainability and Resilience CM credit live or on demand. And we are so thankful to Christine Dorsey and the Planners Webcast Series for partnering with us to bring the series to life. Series recordings are a permanent library of resources available for free, thanks to the dedicated efforts of my fellow professionals donating their time and expertise to make presentations and organize events. Now available on the YouTube playlist, as you can see, are all of these great sessions. Too many to read off at this point, so just follow the link shown to find any of these, and I believe we will also be able to post this link in the chat. As Christine said, this recording today is going to be available soon on the same platform, so look for it there. Next slide. And there are more exciting sessions coming up in this calendar year. Stay tuned for the registration to open for March 22nd, a webinar on trails as resilient infrastructure with the Trust for Public Land and Tool Design Group, which will be moderated by one of my partners in crime for this series, Jim Schwab. And stay tuned for more events later this year. Next slide. So you are about to hear planning and zoning for battery energy storage systems, otherwise known as BESS. During today's session, we'll hear from a panel of professionals from the planning and utility worlds who have firsthand knowledge about these systems to share with us as we anticipate their implementation in our communities in the near and not so distant future. So this session is about an emerging land use and a positive development in our energy sector that has the potential to empower, no pun intended, local communities. BESS is a phenomenon that planners should be aware of and which can help communities meet sustainability and resilience goals. So we'll come away today with a better understanding of BESS and with some in-depth exposure to real-world examples of its use. Hopefully this will instill in you some ideas about how it may be applicable in your own communities and cities. As always, planners can make a visible and important difference given their role in putting forth solutions to problems and facilitating a local process that connects to as well as influences broader efforts. Our actions have the potential to create lasting positive change in the community and the environment around us. 3 brief presentations will be followed by an opportunity for Q&A, and there will be a few polling questions as well, which will help us get to know better your familiarity and views about this topic. Next slide. Today's speakers are ready to share their expertise on this subject, and I'll let them introduce themselves more fully. We're going to hear from Brian Ross, who is a vice president with the Great Plains Institute, Jared Newton, Director of Engineering and System Operations at Connexus Energy, the largest electric cooperative in the Midwest, and Rob Davis, the Public Affairs Programs and Media Relations Lead at Connexus Energy. So thanks for attending today. I'll turn it now over to Brian Ross to make the first presentation.
Okay, thank you, Carla and Christine, for this wonderful opportunity that we have to present this material. So I'll see about getting my screen, up and running here. So is that working?
Looks good. Yep, looks great.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks for coming here. We're going to talk a little bit about planning and zoning for battery energy storage systems. As we say, are the next clean energy land use that planners have to learn how to deal with. I am Brian Ross with the Great Plains Institute. Great Plains Institute is a nonprofit organization. We've been around 25 years. We have the humble mission of accelerating the transition to net zero carbon emissions for the benefit of people, economy, and environment. We are based out of Minneapolis, but we do work broadly across the Midwest and nationally on a number of different issues. And I am the head of the renewable energy program at Great Plains Institute and an urban planner for all of my career. So the agenda today is to kind of give a brief review of what exactly are battery energy storage systems. What is BESS? A little bit of energy storage basics, including kind of existing energy storage in the community and some of the unique risks associated with battery storage that communities will want to know about as they kind of look at this new land use. We'll have a discussion about battery storage use cases, which is the kind of use cases that planners need to think about and consider as they start to see this particular application show up in their communities. And then we're going to spend some time on a case study where my colleagues from Connexus are going to present the work that they've done. They are a national leader in putting clean energy and integrating things like battery storage into their system, and some of the land use issues that they faced and some of the solutions that they came up with in terms of kind of what they were as they worked with communities. I'll then go back and talk a little bit about some of the battery storage ordinances that we've already seen in terms of the scans that we've done across the nation and some recommended practices that planners should consider as they move into integrating BESS into their ordinances. So are going to have a number of polling questions, and here is the first one where we want to know, does your community already zone for energy storage land uses? We have a few multiple guest questions here for you.
All right, folks, you should see a pop-up on your screens. If you are on a mobile device, sometimes they just don't pop up. So we apologize. It's just the law of the jungle, I guess. So go ahead and make your selection. We'll give it a few more moments and then share the results. So again, is your community zone for energy storage land use? Yes, we have an energy storage ordinance, not directly, but we cover it. Nope, we don't address it. And I don't know what you're talking about when you say energy storage. So give it another couple seconds here. Okay. Thanks to all those who participated. I'm going to go ahead and close it and share our results. All right, so it looks like the largest component, 57%. Nope, we don't address it. Energy storage in our ordinance. Coming in second is, well, not directly, but we cover it as a component of other associated land uses. So those are our top two. But you know what? I got to tell you, we still definitely have 13% that are here for a good reason, because they're going to learn all about energy storage.
Okay. So it was kind of a little bit of a trick question, as we're going to discuss here in just a second. But it's good to know kind of that there are a few people out there with an energy storage ordinance, and also some people who are just still looking ahead. So what is battery energy storage? Battery energy storage is something that has really had a lot of transformative effects in our society. The improvement in battery technologies that have transformed a lot of things in the last 30 years or so, as those of us who are working off of laptops, who are using our cell phones, understand entirely. So when we talk about battery energy storage systems, are we talking about things like that, cell phones and laptops? We're talking about scooters and electric bikes, electric vehicles or Tesla power walls, some of those things that people out there we read about in California, Arizona, no doubt a few of you who are on the call today seem to be doing with their solar arrays in their big solar farms. What exactly is battery energy storage? So I put up here the definition as we get from our colleagues at the National Renewable Energy Lab and some of their fact sheets that they have. A battery energy storage system is an electrochemical device that charges or collects energy from the grid or a power plant, and then discharges that energy at a later time to provide electricity or other grid services. And this is an important distinction, because we do hear a lot about people who want to know, when they hear battery energy storage systems, are we talking about, for instance, electric vehicles or scooters, or bicycles or other things that are mobile or personal devices? And we are not. Battery energy storage is something that is a stationary device. It is not a movable device or a portable device. And it is designed to collect and then discharge energy from either a power plant or the grid. So that's the broad definition of battery storage. This is something that is coming up in very rapidly as a land use in a lot of communities across the nation. And I wanted to address a little bit about why that is. We have kind of four things that we've identified that are important about why we're seeing BESS and why we will continue to see an expansion of BESS in communities. What we're seeing in the graph there, this is the number of, this is the total national capacity that has been for which developers are applying for access to the transmission grid. And this data is kept by our friends at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and published every year. And you can see back in 2016 and 17, basically, there were no projects at all that were being proposed to be interconnected to the transmission grid for the battery projects of different types. And then since then, we have seen a rapid escalation, and we kind of have four different categories here, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit in terms of the use cases of batteries. We have a very small amount of wind energy projects that are also using storage that have been proposed for interconnection. A much larger number of solar and storage energy projects, but the single biggest category is just the standalone battery that are being used either on the transmission grid or in conjunction with an existing utility system elsewhere. And the numbers there may not mean that much to you. There's a total in 2022 of 650 gigawatts worth of battery projects that were installed. But to put that in the context, we did make a note there that the total amount of electric generating capacity in the nation on the grid is 1,200 gigawatts. So basically, battery projects that have been proposed in 2022 are equal to over half of the existing installed capacity of electric generating capacity in the nation. So that gives you a context that there is a lot out there that is being proposed, and this is going to move ahead faster. And the reason for this is, one, that there has been a dramatic expansion, which I'm not showing on the graph, of renewable energy. And that creates new value for storage because obviously renewable energy does have some intermittency associated with it. It works, and so the capital you put into a solar array, you want to capture it and use it. And the only way to do that is with battery energy systems. And since wind and solar energy are the cheapest ways to generate electricity in the world, it is a very important thing for developers and utilities who want to capture that very inexpensive electricity and use it as much as they can on the grid. The second reason, of course, is that there's simply been significant cost decreases in battery technologies and new technologies that are coming on the market, and it enables uses to be captured. And our Jared from Connexus is going to talk a little bit about this, how they have started to use batteries in ways that didn't used to be possible when the technologies were different and when the costs were much higher. The third reason is that there's new federal policy and incentives that are driving a lot of investment. The Inflation Reduction Act passed in late 2021. Instituted new production tax credits and investment tax credits that for which large-scale batteries are eligible. They used to only be eligible if they were hooked up directly to a solar or wind system. Now they are eligible as a standalone investment. And that's a very large tax credit that is now available to help push the cost down even further and enable this new technology to help our burgeoning clean energy system moving ahead. And the final point is that there are actually, by a lot of states, a new state-based policy that is mandating that utilities invest in energy storage. And the reason those states are doing that, something like 12 or 14 states, is that the energy storage capacity is one that will enable states to meet clean energy goals and climate goals. And so by requiring that those utilities actually make investments in batteries, we're going to see accelerated capacity and ability to integrate more renewable energy into the grid. So these four things are really driving a very rapid change in battery use and applications. So now I'm going to ask you, now that you know what a BESS is, we're going to ask another polling question. How might you actually use this or address this in your ordinance? We saw from the previous example that there were very few people who actually had an ordinance, but if you did do it, how would you do it? And so I gave you some planning-based questions here. You're likely to require a conditional or special use permit, but generally to allow such things. You're not going to allow it unless it's sited with a solar or wind farm, so kind of for an industrial use, so only associated with one of those other uses. You probably would not allow it unless there was a text amendment to your ordinance, because your current ordinance doesn't allow it. You already have a system, or you really still have no idea how you would do it.
Sorry, folks, my I'm gonna try to launch it again. Let's see if I can. Oh yeah, I can. You guys, I can relaunch it. All right. They were out of order on my end, so I apologize. So if you started answering other questions, folks, you can re-answer them again.
Oh, well, that was probably my fault. My apologies.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. This
Is
will be
question
just
2 showing
exciting.
up on everybody's screen?
No,
Cause
I have question 4 up on now, and folks are answering. Okay, good. Yeah, I'm getting thumbs up.
Okay. And hopefully this doesn't mean that I actually put this in twice. So, but if so, we'll just skip the other one.
All right, I'll give it a couple more seconds. And I see folks are raising their hand. You don't need to do that. I can't do anything about it. If you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box, but we don't give any kind of voice controls or anything. So no need to raise your hand. All right, I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, good. We're at like 76%. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and share these results. So the largest component, 35%, is likely requires a conditional or special use permit, but generally allowed, followed by 27% likely needs a text amendment. It's not, BESS is in a listed use. So those are the top two. And at the bottom is we've already established BESS standards in our zoning ordinance, which I guess makes sense that that's at the bottom because folks are here to learn about it. So I just stopped sharing, and Brian, it's back to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. It sounds like things got cut off for a second. So let's talk a little bit. Since 24 people really had no idea, I'm going to hopefully at the end of this session, you'll have some idea about how you want to address this. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about energy storage basis, the existing energy storage in the community. Remember that first question that we asked about whether you had any energy storage in your community? Well, it was a little bit of a trick question because in fact, everybody has energy storage in your community and you're already addressing it in your zoning ordinances. Energy storage uses are routine. It's just that we think of them as things like gas stations. There is a very large component of our existing land uses that include energy storage as a routine part of that. Gas stations have, underground storage tanks of gasoline that can be, typically are at least in the, 1,000 to 1,200 gallon size and sometimes multiple tanks. It is a very large energy storage. In fact, on a BTU basis, it's easily as big of an energy storage as many battery installations that we'll be talking about in a while. So this is something that is actually routine in the community, a variety of different kinds of land uses that include energy storage, just not battery storage. Another example of that, the reason for that, I guess that I want to raise that is that the existing energy storage standards that you have about addressing things like propane, ammonia, gasoline can actually inform your land use treatment of BESS. And you can use the same portfolio of tools that you use for those other land uses to mitigate risk for BESS. Things like use standards, setbacks, integrated code and safety standards that are established by code organizations, et cetera. So you already have some tools, you can already use them. BESS is a new element of energy storage, but it is not a new complete land use in terms of energy storage. And the risks and nuisances associated with these different forms of storage will vary. So when we're looking at a grain elevator, which is a form of energy storage, and which those of you who are familiar with this particular land use know that it occasionally blows up. Not very often, but it does do that. And that's because it's an energy storage component. We just don't think of it that way. However, some of the risks and nuisances associated with that are not going to be the same kinds of things that are associated with storage of propane or the storage of gasoline or the use of energy systems. And even with, battery systems. And even within battery systems, as I'll talk about in just a minute, there are different kinds of risks and different kinds of opportunities associated with different kinds of battery chemistries. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are the unique risks of battery energy storage that might distinguish it from the other kinds of energy storage that are already in your community? The primary thing that people talk about in terms of a risk associated with battery energy storage is something we call thermal runaway or thermal stability. and that is when a battery is made up of a large number of individual cells, which are then coupled together. And we do have occasions with this technology that an individual cell will malfunction or something else will go wrong with it. It'll have some kind of damage, and it will start to overheat. And that's where we start to get thermal runaway, where if we don't address that in a straightforward or catch it in a quick enough manner, the cells can start to overheat, which can then damage surrounding cells. And the ultimate bad news, when that is not contained, is that we end up with a fire. So the most common type of battery storage that we see applied in BESS are lithium-based chemistries. And those of us, we've all heard about lithium batteries and some of the dilemmas that we see with certain kinds of lithium batteries in terms of overheating or fires, airplanes that won't let them come onto the plane except in certain containers, et cetera. But it's important to know that different kinds of battery chemistries, different kinds of lithium chemistries have different kinds of profiles and risks. For instance, the kind of battery, lithium battery that you see in an electric vehicle or in a lot of portable devices is something called a lithium nickel cobalt battery. And the reason that that's a good application for those devices is because they're high power density and low weight. So those are, you can't have too heavy of a battery in an electric vehicle or it doesn't perform. And so they look for those characteristics in the batteries, and the lithium nickel cobalt serves that purpose. Most stationary batteries, on the other hand, are something called lithium iron phosphate. They are much heavier. They are a lower power density, but if it's a stationary battery, that's okay. It doesn't matter if how much weight it is because it's just sitting on the ground. And those batteries actually have a lower thermal runaway risk than do the lithium nickel cobalt batteries. Not that the other has a high risk of fire, but it is, because the power density is lower, it is also a lower risk. And then there are different kinds of battery chemistries which are evolving, particularly for BESS applications, things called flow batteries or things called iron air batteries, which are completely different chemistries and which serve different purposes on the grid. An iron air battery, for instance, is something that has a much longer discharge ability. A lithium battery is typically going to be discharged in something like 4 hours. An iron air battery can be discharged in, I believe, if I'm getting this right, it's something like 100 hours. And so it has a different application and it also a different thermal risk. So these are just things you need to know about when you talk about battery storage in your community, and something that you can actually inquire of the applicant about what kind of chemistry they're using. These different kinds of battery energy storage systems also have different safety standards that have already been designed. The primary one that you need to think about is the National Fire Protection Agency NFPA 855 standard. That is the standard that really sets a lot of the testing and safety standards for batteries, and that have been integrated into a lot of the other safety standards. For instance, the International Fire Code, which uses the NFPA 855 standard. When the 855 standard has things like requirements about fire suppression systems, containers that the things have to be in. It has training requirements for people who operate this, and notification requirements. Batteries that come under that standard have to meet certain testing requirements in order to validate their legitimacy and safety. So this is kind of the key standard that you need to keep in mind with. The Underwriters Laboratory and some similar organizations are also third-party certifiers of specific electric products, including batteries, and they also have testing standards that have to be passed in order to be certified as UL certified. So the good thing here is that that you don't have to write the safety standards. You already have standards for BESS that you can incorporate by reference into your ordinance. Okay, and here is, I think, maybe the mix-up that I had, because I think this is the one that I was going to do earlier. So maybe we should just skip this one, because this was supposed to be in the other place. I put the slides in the wrong order. Is that okay, Christine?
That's fine with me.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about energy storage use cases. When you think about BESS, there are, and stationary batteries, there are 4 use cases that you can generally talk about. There are some subsets of these use cases, but these are the kind of things to really think about where you're going to see it in your community. And the 4 are residential BESS systems, commercial BESS systems, grid scale BESS systems, and BESS systems associated with power production. So I'm going to go over each one of these in a little more detail. A residential BESS system, a battery system, is something that's typically associated in a home with a solar installation, usually as some kind of a backup system that has been put in place in order for the homeowner to have some limited backup capacity if the power system goes down. There is an increasing number of residential systems that are being put in place in order to better address changes to net metering laws. But I'm not going to go into that at this point in time. Just know that this is a growing phenomenon, and the economics are improving. You're more likely to see these kinds of systems. The battery capacity in the residential system is well below the 600 kWh threshold that is in that NFPA 855 standard. 600 kWh is where the NFPA 855 requires systems to start meeting testing requirements, fire suppression requirements, et cetera. And so most residential installations are going to be in the 25 to 100 kWh range. Just as an example that may also help you with, an electric car is going to be somewhere in the, a new electric car will be somewhere in the 50 to 100 kWh battery range. So the size of a battery in the cars are generally going to be bigger than the size of batteries you'll see in a residential and stationary application, or of the same size at the very least. And the Underwriters Laboratory also has some specific standards associated with residential systems that deal with lower, the way that the code should require residential battery systems to be installed in the home. So again, it's not something that you have to address in your land use code. It is something that is already addressed in the electric code. Commercial battery systems that you see in a building are similarly frequently associated with solar installations, generally inside the principal or accessory use structure on the facility. So they're not outside of the existing buildings. The battery capacity for these kind of commercial systems, I would say, are typically below that 600 kWh 855 threshold standard, but we do see some commercial installations in excess of that require the installations to actually meet those safety standards, even though they are typically inside the principal structure or the accessory structure. And I was going to change that last bullet point to talk about commercial installations. We do see them getting to be very big when we start talking about data centers and things like that, which are using them for power conditioning and backup. But in most cases, they're going to be probably below the 600 kWh threshold. Then we kind of move on to the next use case, which is large-scale batteries in power generation. And this is where you're seeing large-scale batteries associated with solar and wind energy farms, or occasionally with other kinds of power production. They're usually installed, they are always installed at the sites where the power is being generated, but they are not contained within a separate structure. In other words, they're kind of an accessory use on the same site as the wind or solar facility or other power production facility. These batteries are well above the 600 kWh threshold and are subject to all the containment and fire protection testing and other standards. And these batteries are probably the biggest ones that we would see in terms of BESS. They range from sometimes just a few megawatts to hundreds of megawatts. I think I have even heard of gigawatt-sized batteries. The physical size of the batteries, of the containers, which we'll see some pictures of here in a little bit, can be for as small as a quarter acre or even smaller to over 10 acres. And I think that there are probably some examples of even larger ones. But a solar array, a very large scale solar or wind farm that uses a lot of battery within it would be kind of in the taking up acres of land, and it would be multiple containers of batteries on a single site. And the final use case that you need to be aware of, and this is the one that is probably has the most variability of all, is large scale batteries on the grid that are typically installed at existing or new substations. They are within their own kind of container structure, but usually on the same site as the substation. The battery capacity is well above the 600 kWh threshold and subject to all of the standards there. But it typically is not going to be as big of a battery installation as you would see on a solar farm. The physical size is usually less than an acre, sometimes significantly less than that. And they range, they start at around a megawatt hour size to more than 10. Although that there is some variability in that. And the important thing on this use case is that the batteries are installed anywhere where the grid is. So anywhere where you might have a substation, you might have a battery, and that could include any one of your zoning districts and almost anywhere on the land use transect. So you could have a rural application, you could have a very urban application where the batteries would go on, because that's where the grid is, and that's where the benefit of the batteries are to the community. So now I am going to hand over this to talk about our case study with Conexus Energy. So I will move the slide for you, Jared, and I will go off mic, I think, if I can do it.
All right, Brian, thank you very much for setting me up here. You can go ahead and jump to the next slide as I introduce myself. So yes, I'm Jared Newton. I'm the Director of Engineering and System Operations at Conexus Energy. We're a distribution cooperative in the northern suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Everything I say today kind of comes from this distribution utility perspective. I've been lucky enough to work in the distribution business for 20 plus years doing electrical engineering work. So that's really my expertise. And, I've had some good experiences working with our local planners, and, excited to share that experience. So a little more about Conexus. You can see the map there on your left. We're kind of right in the north-south middle of Minnesota. And then that zoom in shows the service territory that we cover and the existing renewable sites that we have on our system. We're a large electric cooperative, but we're a relatively small utility. So you may have very large investor-owned utilities in your area, but we're we serve 7 counties in the area around Minneapolis. So that's where we are. We have 145,000 members. At a co-op, we call our consumers members. So if you hear me slip into members, that's what I'm talking about. And as of today, our power portfolio is about 38% carbon free, coming from these locations I show here. So next slide, Brian. So let me tell you a little bit about where we're seeing utilities using grid connected battery storage. So the different groups that Brian showed, I'm talking about grid connected on the distribution grid. So this is one of our installations that you can see here. Those 5 containers are where the batteries are stored. That's standard shipping container sizes. And that's connected to the types of power lines that run through your neighborhood. So that's the type of installation I'm talking about. And so we've used those for demand response, and I'll tell you more about that here on the next couple of slides. And we're starting to consider being able to use these for grid resiliency. So, restoration after an outage, maybe a prolonged ice storm or some, summer thunderstorm. How could we use these batteries to improve reliability on the grid? And then the most recent use case that I'll finish with that we've had the most recent experience with is capital construction deferral. So that is, building a battery installation rather than other traditional construction. And then the one I've highlighted here in green because it's relatively new to us. In the last few months, Minnesota has passed some legislation to go 100% carbon free by 2040. And we're pretty sure batteries are going to play an important role there, but we're still getting our arms around that. So I can't quite say what I think that how that will impact our decisions going forward, but I think it's going to play a pretty significant role. All right, next one. Thank you. So again, here's kind of a close-up view of this installation. We've operated this facility since 2018, so we've had a pretty good experience doing that. And this is a portion of a 15 megawatt system. This part here is 6 megawatts. So each house is maybe in the 5 kilowatt range. So 6 megawatts, maybe a small city is what this is capable of serving, just to kind of give some perspective of what we're talking about here. As far as we know, this is the first and only system of this type in the area. You can see in the background in 2018, we did couple these with solar. So this facility here that I'm showing is charged 100% from the neighboring solar. Again, that was a financial decision in that it allowed us to qualify for a tax credit. And so with this, we've been able to develop processes that help us use this to improve the way our grid operates. We did this for a financial reason that, everything we do, we make sure it makes financial sense for our members. But we also recognize some of the other benefits we're going to get from that. And then the last piece here, we have a team of folks that are operating this and learning how to use it so that we can extend the use cases for the batteries. And I'll get into that here in just a second. So next one. And give me one more click, Brian. So for demand response, the graph here I'm showing on the right is a typical load curve that really almost every utility will see. In the morning, as we see people get up and get going for the day, we'll see the load demand on the system start to ramp up. And then by mid-morning, it starts to drop off. And then you can see here, this on the very far left of that graph is kind of the lunchtime. And so we'll see load start to grow in the late afternoon, early evening, and then peaks. This one actually came from the winter, so it peaks a little earlier. In the summer, we see the peak a little later in the evening. So you can see there's a pretty strong peak there, and then it starts to fall off, throughout the night. And so demand response is just using batteries to limit that overall peak. What we find is the peak power, so that kind of last few megawatts that we have to provide are the most expensive to provide. And often, the cost structure with our regional transmission grid is such that if we can lower that peak, we can have a pretty good impact in lowering our wholesale power cost, which is a savings for us, which in turn is a savings for our members. So if you click for me here, Brian, on the green line here is using the axis on the right. And so we're showing deploying 12 to 15 megawatts of batteries for over 3 hours. And by doing that, you see the resulting red line is the actual experienced load demand. And so we're able to reduce, sort of the area between the red and blue line. That's energy that was not required to be delivered. And so the cost impact of that is pretty significant to minimize that peak delivery amount. We've done this, like I said, since 2018, gotten really pretty good at it. Summer and winter, it performs well. And so we've really seen a lot of success here. All right, next one, Brian. All right, so the next use case, and this sort of leads me into my most recent case and kind of my most recent experience with our local, one of our local cities and their planning commission. So historically at any distribution utility as we identify a weakness on our grid where maybe there's new development or maybe there's just been some incremental load growth. We look through our portfolio of tools and think, how can we solve this problem? And as battery prices have come down in the last 5 years, we've seen more and more that batteries are a viable option for solving some of these traditional shortcomings on our distribution system. And so capital deferral is just kind of the fancy way of saying we looked at building new power lines and we decided that installing a battery was actually a better solution than something that's more traditional. So that's the use case that I'm going through here. Next one. So yeah, you hop to the next one, Brian. Sorry about that. And so what I've done here is I've streamlined the presentation that I gave to our local planning commission to give you a flavor of kind of how we presented this and see what that experience was like. So at Connexus, the feedback we get from our members is that they're most concerned about the affordability of power and the reliability of power. So they want to make sure the lights are on when, as often as possible, and they don't want the cost to get, out of control. So reliability is a real important thing as we're asking people to electrify their lives. Reliability becomes even more important. So at Connexus, on average, our members see an outage about every 3.5 years, which is industry leading. Really something we're proud of and something we know is important to our members. So next, Brian. All right, so here there's a kind of a special use case. Like I said, batteries are a tool. They're not always the right tool. And so in this case, we have sort of some special circumstances. The Connexus service territory is the area inside that purple line. And so you can see there's kind of a real odd, peninsula shaped service territory. It's uncommon that we would, we don't have this in most of our service territory. And so as we look at this area and we start to have some concerns for how we can serve this reliably, we look at, could we build another line into this area? And you can see that if we were going to build from one of our neighbors, we don't have any neighbors here, that we're kind of off alone on this finger of service territory. And so that's really where this genesis of the battery to serve this came from, is that, the cost to build a traditional solution here is greater than other places. And so the battery starts to make sense. All right, next, Brian. All right, so here's the project site that we're talking about. Brian mentioned often these are installed in a substation, and I think we'll see that more going forward, especially if solar is not required. When solar is required, clearly it has a pretty bigger footprint that is needed. In this case, we'll be charging these batteries from the grid during off-peak hours, so we can take advantage of the area around our existing substation. So we actually own more property than maybe it's clear to see here. And so our expectation is that we will extend kind of behind the substation. Sorry, I should have included a rectangle there. But from the street, the area behind the substation, we have more land back there. And so that's where we will be installing 3 more containers that will interconnect into this facility. Next. And so as we got into this project, we first met with the planning commission informally, as soon as we had some details to share with them to get an understanding of what their concerns were. And as Brian mentioned, the fire chief's part of city staff, and he had several questions to ask about this. And so we were able to bring him out to our existing facilities and meet with a group that we contract with to do training to talk about how to manage these facilities safely, what the expectation is. And so we found that having city staff out on site and able to look at this, get a fully guided tour and understand what they're working with by the end, the fire chief was thrilled with it and had a good understanding of what the expectations were, and really was at ease kind of moving forward with this. All right, next one. All right, so then the timeline. So, we started planning this project early in 2022, but it took some time working out the details, request for proposal, getting those requests back, and working through our vendor to understand what the project was going to look like. And then, like I said, we met with city staff informally early, a lot of good collaboration there. And then, as we applied for the conditional use permit in September, it took a month to get on the agenda there, and then a month for council and working through that. And then we broke ground kind of late fall, early winter here just a few months ago. And so we've done rough grading so far and have started working on some retaining walls to make some extra room there. And then the expectation is we'll begin above grade construction in kind of the April timeframe, 2024. Minnesota winter construction creates its own, unique requirements here, but that's the plan there. So next one, Brian. All right, so I have to say, my experience with the city here and the planning commission was really tremendous. And when I thought back as to what I think drove that was, we met it really early with them, and created a nice relationship to make sure they understood that we were looking for a collaborative relationship. We weren't in any way looking to show up and tell them what we were going to do. We wanted to find a solution that worked for both of us. And so that was really nice. Batteries are new, right? That's why we're on this webinar, is to learn a little more about batteries. So offering them some opportunities to come out and see our facilities and understand, what's really in there and how the systems work, and, showing them the remote, monitoring and communication we have to those sites is great. And then finally, know your expertise. Conexus is, we're really good at engineering a power system, but, we're not civil engineers. We don't really interact with our city planning commissions that often. And so we used an outside contractor to help us with the civil package, and really, kind of gave them that introduction that we want to work with these folks as closely as we can, and give them the information they need so that we can produce a plan that meets the city's expectations and then also meets our requirements. All right, and then I have 2 more slides to show just some quick examples of some of the information we provided. You can see a little more about the project. You can see the area kind of hatched behind the substation site where we're planning to show those, to install those batteries. Next, Brian. Maybe one more back. There you go. And then obviously we recognize the importance of trees and screening. A couple of trees are coming down, so to make room for that. And so we'll be reinstalling or planting new trees. I guess don't install a tree. We'll be planting some trees there again to make it as good as how we found it. So that's what I have. Rob?
That's great. It's been really wonderful to be able to work very closely with the engineering team. So Rob Davis, I work in public affairs for Conexus. And Jared and I and the whole team here at Conexus is really grateful to the city of Vadnais Heights, members of the Planning Commission, members of City Council, mayor, fire chief, and their team for their proactive and thoughtful approach to welcoming this as a new development. We know that battery storage has a wide variety of use cases. Around here at Conexus, we often talk about it as a Swiss Army knife. There's a number of different ways that it can, create value for the grid, which ultimately saves our members money or, ratepayers money in a investor-owned utility environment. So as you're all thinking about looking at your zoning and other ordinances, particularly those of you that are in one of those dozen states that currently has a statewide requirement on the investor-owned utilities to procure, a couple thousand megawatts of battery storage. I'd encourage you to be thoughtful about being proactive about including battery storage language in your zoning and in your plans, because the city of Adams Heights is excited about the economic development story of welcoming projects like this. They see their community as becoming a sustainability leader. They want to attract those businesses and those residents that want to live and work in a community where they're part of the solution. And so as we look to the future for more and more of these projects that will be on the grid and need to find places to be located, the developers of these projects are looking for communities that are leaning forward, that are open to the forms of development, and that's a great place for them to create jobs right there in your community. So as Brian said, batteries have the opportunity to create value in every place where the grid is. It's not just an industrial zoning situation. It's not just a residential zoning situation. Everywhere that the grid goes, and particularly for an organization like us, it's an independent nonprofit cooperative that has distribution ownership. We're excited about creating value and saving money for our members. So yeah, so we're really appreciative of the dialogue today, and thank you, Brian and APA, for highlighting Conexus Energy. We're delighted to be the largest cooperative in the Midwest and an example for others. We always say that cooperatives share cooperatively, so don't be hesitant about reaching out. You can go to the next slide, Brian. You're muted, Brian.
Yeah, sorry. The next slide here is we have one more polling question. If we can get through this. Now that you've kind of heard a little bit about what BESS is and kind of the different applications of it from the utility side, where do you envision BESS being installed in your community? And we have a number of different answers here that you can take a look at and consider.
All right, folks, go ahead and answer questions. So solar and wind farms, wherever substations are located, industrial facilities or data centers, community resilience centers, emergency shelters, schools and hospitals, or all the above. So we'll give it a few more moments. I'm going to go ahead and close this and share the results. So by far, folks on the line are saying all the above, all of them.
But it is interesting that there's also some folks who kind of picked out other uses specifically, because we do see applications everywhere. It doesn't mean that all of these are going to be applicable for every community, but these are the kinds of places, obviously, where we're seeing people consider BESS to be installed. And I think I've also identified oops, hang on. I have another polling question here, but this is the one that we've already done. So I'm going to skip this one. So sorry, my apologies. When I was obviously dropping these polling questions in, I put them in the wrong places. So I'll just move on here. And we'll talk about what the current ordinance practices are. There's not a lot of communities that have done energy BESS in their zoning ordinances. There was a really nice study that was done last year by the Pacific Northwest National Lab, where they actually went to and did a search of the Municode database, looking for references to energy storage and battery storage. And what they found was, out of the thousands of jurisdictions that they examined in the Municode database, they only found 59 ordinances that actually addressed battery energy storage systems. And those ordinances weren't all zoning ordinances. They were actually included some that were building, fire, sustainability, and tax ordinances. So there actually is a fairly small subset of communities that have addressed BESS indirectly in their zoning ordinance. And that is not the entire universe in the Media Code database, is not the entire universe, obviously, of ordinances. We did find a few that were not captured in that search, but it really does indicate that this is a new ground and for communities to kind of to plow. So one of the things that they did find, I will note here, is that there were a lot of commonalities across the ordinances that they found. They looked at all of them, and there is a model ordinance that was developed by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, that is called the New York Battery Energy Storage System Model Law. And a lot of the ordinances, including ones outside of New York, were using that as a reference point. And so there is some commonality. One of the things that particular ordinance did was that it wrote into the ordinance the kind of NPFA 855 standards based around the 600 kWh threshold, and put that directly into the model ordinance. The Great Plains Institute also did we looked at this plus some other published and unpublished work on energy storage ordinances. I have one of them up there, the APA's, in a nod toward the APA, they have their solar at scale, where they did actually address kind of the energy storage applications at solar facilities, and provided a number of examples in that guidebook, which you can download for free on the APA website. But in our evaluation of all of these different things, plus some of our own evaluation of ordinances that we had come across independently, we typically found that BESS ordinances included the following components here. They would have a definition, which is a good thing, right? There were use permissions and standards about which districts things were allowed in, which kinds of BESS applications were allowed in which districts. Most of them had dimensional standards of some kind, setbacks and height standards. Performance and design standards were frequently included, sometimes in great detail, around things like how to contain design standards to contain spillage, or if there was a fire, the firefighting foams and things like that, while other ones were very simple. Most of the ordinances addressed safety and first responder standards, including things like requiring the developer, if needed, to train the first responders in the community as part of the standards for installation. And then, of course, decommissioning standards. That was something that was found fairly frequently in the existing ordinances. And just to throw a couple up here, we don't have time to go over this in any detail, but I wanted to give a couple of examples of different ways that communities defined BESS in their ordinances and addressed them via the definitions. Yorktown, New York has a very detailed, I didn't even include the whole thing here, definitions where they have 3 different tiers of BESS that they are addressing in their ordinance, with different standards associated with each one of them. And they had some additional charts and things that I didn't include. Tier 1 are really the residential applications, and you can see that they have some standards associated with the size of the batteries and the way that they have to be addressed within the structure of the building. And this is something that is actually embedded already in, I believe, it's either in the National Fire Code or in the UL standards. So it is not necessary to include this, but it is something that they reiterated within their code about how they wanted to see that particular tier 1 addressed. Tier 2 was something that also fell below the 600 kWh standard, but it was greater than, or it wasn't part of a residential system. And then their tier 3 standard was all those systems which exceeded the 600 kWh standard, and also possibly where there was more than one battery technology in a single room or indoor area, which is another component of the NPFA 855 standard. Another example that's very different was Will County, Illinois. where they have a definitional threshold really that was based on size and really focused almost exclusively on BESS systems that were associated with solar farms or wind farms. They actually included, you can see in the bold text down at the bottom in B, battery storage facilities of 10 acres or less in size as one of their subcomponents to the broader land use category, which is utilities and services minor. So they actually included, a 5-acre BESS system as a minor utility and services land use. And the reason for that really is that they were focused on applications that are going to be within the context of a solar or a wind farm. And so they defined it this way. It met the specific use case that they were looking at, and their threshold was greater than 10 acres and less than 10 acres, which is, of course, substantially different than the example that we just saw. I just wanted to highlight these two things as different ways that different communities are addressing BESS in their ordinances, and how there is some nuance about how you might do it, but also some attention that probably needs to be paid to use cases that might be other than just associated with solar farms. Finally, this is my final slide where I just wanted to say we have a series of recommended practices for ordinances. I will note that we have in the relative near future, all this material is going to be covered in a zoning practice article that we're putting forward. It's not out for publication yet, but it does include a little bit more detailed description, for instance, of the recommended practices and what these means as you kind of develop standards. So the things that we recommend when you look at your land use standards for BESS is that you should exempt small BESS, things that are below that 600 kWh threshold, from zoning standards. They're not exempt from code standards or safety standards that are otherwise managed by your community or by state officials. But they are generally inside of existing buildings, and they generally are not going to create a land use issue. And so it's not something that you need to directly address in your zoning standards. You should define BESS as a distinct use, however, in your standards, because there are going to be applications where it's not simply going to be a component of an existing land use, but something that needs to be addressed separately. And that allows you to kind of get to those nuances about risk management in your community, consistent with the other risks that you manage in your community. The third point is make sure that you're permitting BESS as accessory use where that makes sense. Some communities have chosen to, include BESS as an accessory use to a solar or wind farm. Other ones have chosen to make it create it as a standalone and treat it as a principal use, even when it's within the existing principal use of a solar farm. There's a similar question about whether or not you treat BESS as an accessory use or principal use when it's associated with a substation, as we heard from Connexus. We would recommend that in those cases, especially when it's within the existing footprint of the substation, it should probably be treated as an accessory use. But that, again, does not mean that it shouldn't be treated. The safety testing, fire protection, and first responder standards should still be in place. Make sure you think about BESS across the entire land use transect. Everywhere where the grid is, BESS has value. Think about how that might apply in a residential district versus an industrial district, but don't try to treat BESS as something that should only fit into a particular district or districts. Obviously requiring compliance in your ordinance with NFPA 855, including where needed training or communication with first responders, as Jared actually outlined that Connexus did. It's a good idea. And you should be requiring, of course, a decommissioning plan as part of your ordinance. So with that, I have just the final polling question, which is going to help us as people who try to help communities move toward clean energy and climate resilience. What resources would be most useful or helpful for you as you start to address energy storage land uses, in particular BESS? So we have a number of things up here that we put up. You may think of something else. I'd be interested to know what those something else's are. but we probably don't have time to go into it here today. So more information on the safety and risks, information on community resilience and equity issues, as kind of Rob had touched on. Where do these things actually provide value to the immediate community? Where is resilience most important in your community in terms of the most vulnerable populations? Do you need selected model language for different kinds of land uses? Do you need training for first responders? Are there fact sheets that you're interested in? Battery storage, clean energy, different kinds of applications, something else. So we can
I'll
start
give it
planning
another
what
moment
we,
here.
okay, what the Great Plains Institute is one of the several NGOs kind of doing work with communities on clean energy issues. This is something that's particularly important to us.
Model language, model language, model language.
Yes. Okay. All right. And then a few people had other ideas. And if you want to email me those ideas, that would be great. Oops, let's see. And here's our contact information. We put this up at the start. I'm putting it up at the end. I'd be interested in whatever ideas you have or information you might need. We are kind of trying to wrap this into some of our existing technical assistance work and community work. So we're happy to hear from you on that. And thank you very much for your time.
Wonderful. All right. If our panelists wouldn't mind throwing their cameras back on, we have a ton of questions. So I'm trying to kind of push them around and come up with some themes. And the first theme that I want to cover is the lifespan of one of these suckers. And I guess if you could talk about that, and then also the decommissioning process of it and what the implications are of that, like what happens after they're no longer useful, and has
Sure.
there been a case study on that yet?
Sure, I
And that would be a
can
Jared question. Yeah.
about to say
Yeah.
I can touch on that. So, we're at about year 5, and so our agreement with our vendor is that they guarantee a certain amount of efficiency, round trip efficiency, as we charge them, and that the right amount of power comes back out of them. They're built with an expected augmentation, and so what that means is they will add batteries to that over time so that it continues to output the same amount. So those containers that you see aren't 100% full. There's some room in there to add some additional batteries. And then at some point they may have to replace the cells entirely. And so that's how they're going to meet their requirement for the 20 or 25-year life of that contract. Then the question about what do you do when they're done, right? I think we're all still somewhat in the early phases of this. There is recycling available. I think anytime you hear recycling, it's fair to say, well, is it really recycled, and start ask those hard-hitting questions, and those are very valid and fair. And I think we're just not quite there yet to know how good that recycling is. As much of a push as there is with batteries now, the kind of the rare earth metals that are in those batteries are valuable, and so I have pretty high hope that will be done responsibly. And they'll be recycled is the good answer. And I hope the recycling is done well enough to be effective.
What other forms of energy storage are there, besides this, that are being considered being used?
I mean, I think from a pure battery standpoint, some sort of something in this general realm is the big one. The utilities in general, but cooperatives especially, have been storing energy in a water heater for a long, long time. I mean, it seems pretty boring and benign, but we have programs that we've run for many years for folks who don't have natural gas available, where they will have 100 or 120 gallon water heater and heat that water overnight and then discharge that throughout the day, as a way to have off-peak water heating that's fuel efficient or cost effective. And so, I think we're we're trying to get creative and keep our minds open to, there's lots of ways to store energy. From a traditional battery standpoint, I think what we've talked about today is the big ones that are on the, are really commercially available.
Yeah, and I will note that I mean, we aren't talking about this because it's a completely different thing, but I mean the single biggest on the grid, kind of the big on the transmission grid scale or at the investor-owned utility scale, the single largest form of energy storage is pumped hydro, where they in off-peak times they they pump water up to an elevated height, and then when they need power they charge it into a turbine, which turns and produces power. And that's been around for a very long time, and that is the single biggest energy storage use, although we do expect battery storage ultimately to pass that up. It's accelerating so fast in deployment.
And why is that? Why is this catching on the way that it is? I think, like, so I'm looking at it just from the community's perspective when we're talking about NIMBYism, and we're thinking, okay, well, I'm hearing this like hydro stuff. Like, I feel like that is way more efficient and environmentally friendly than these gigantic batteries that are eventually just going to end up in a landfill, just like everything else. And so that's what I'm thinking. So how is this different? Why is this catching on so quickly?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is, and Jared can maybe speak to some of this as well, that there's there's a limitation about what you can do with something like pumped hydro. If you don't have a reservoir to pump to and to discharge from, it's not going to work. To do pumped hydro, you not only have to sometimes create the place to put to store the water, you then have to install a generator, which then is fairly expensive, and that only works some of the time when you're actually using it for the recovery of the energy through the water. And that is a very cost-effective solution when you're working at a big scale. It's not a cost-effective solution when you're looking at a small amount of storage, and that's where batteries are really economically perfect. And maybe Jared, you have something to add to that.
I agree. Batteries are, suitable for just about any environment, I'll say. Whereas pumped, I don't really have anywhere to pump water to store it up high. So if you're at the foothills of something, then maybe that makes sense. But I think we can install a battery, pretty much anywhere. So
are there implications to extreme weather, either extreme heat or extreme cold, or the potential for flooding? What are some of the weather impacts?
Sure. So, Minnesota is pretty cold. And oddly enough, it's hotter than you might imagine too. I mean, you'd think we would get some benefit not to have the heat, but we tend to get them both. And so, I mean, these facilities are climate controlled where the batteries are. So of course there are some, parasitic loads of either heating or cooling those to sort of a moderate temperature. But we operate the fleet of batteries we have today on the hottest and coldest days of the year. That's the only time we operate them. And so we've seen them operate effectively month after month after month for the last 5 years, whether it's in January or July. And they've functioned well for us so far.
Yeah, Jared, I think that I mean the wind chill out today is -5, and that's nothing to the polar vortex of 2 or 3 years ago, -30 and -40. So no problems.
Yeah, and I think that it's a fair question to ask about the kind of resilience or risks associated with extreme weather with these batteries. But one of the flip side of that is that the batteries actually mitigate for the risks to the electric grid posed, for other systems. When it gets that cold, coal piles freeze, natural gas lines, valves cut off. Even sometimes we have seen. We saw some temperatures so cold in one polar vortex that the wind turbines, even the ones in Minnesota designed for cold weather, were having trouble producing and shut down. Some of them did because they were at risk of freezing up the gears. And when those things happen, batteries are actually around to kind of fill the gap. And that's so they actually provide additional resilience to some of the vulnerabilities that we typically see in both our conventional and our renewable systems on the power grid, as well as, of course, the more common outage stuff that you might see where a transmission line or a distribution line goes down, and you need to kind of find local controls or local power in order to fill the gap.
Okay, next series of questions. The environmental concerns, and I guess not just environmental, but also the safety and health concerns. If there's a fire, like what is being released into the environment? And when you do have a fire, if you have all of this fire suppression stuff, and then is it leaking into local waterways, or if it's near a farm, is it leaking into the soil? Does it make a lot of noise? Does it produce like excess heat or anything like that? Do you have to use a lot of water to keep things cool? If we could just kind of talk, because these are just all the questions. We have probably 80 questions coming in. So this is just sort of, I'm taking a bunch of them and throwing them all at you in one nice package.
Sure. I'll jump in. I think Brian probably knows more of the details than I do, but I'll say, I showed on the slide the group we've worked with that does the safety training, and that group, the way we got in touch with them is they do training for local fire departments as it relates to EVs or home systems, and just lots of experience all around the region working on that. And what they tell us and what our vendors tell us is that intentionally, there's really nothing organic in the battery. So there's really nothing that will burn. And so it'll get really hot, and there is, the smoldering of the materials around it, but it's not something you would expect to see just a roiling flame coming out of it. And so it is hot.
Totally what I was expecting.
Yep.
That's totally what my brain was going.
And we as utilities, we work with our local fire departments and tell them if anything's on fire in our facilities, we want them to stand at the fence and make sure nothing else in the area is impacted. We don't want them fighting that fire, because with the electrical facilities there and all the other things that we have going on there, that's not their spot. I made note that all of our substations are remotely monitored. We have communications real time to those sites, similarly to the batteries, real time communications. And so any sensors that indicate any sort of thermal issue or a voltage, where it's out of spec, we're able to turn that off and disconnect power to it. So that greatly limits the option or the likelihood that this could happen. But if it does happen, the clear direction we told the city we worked with is, we're not asking you to run in and do anything to it. Stay away and stay in the neighborhood. We're not asking you to go home and go back to sleep, but be there, and we're not asking you to do anything.
Yeah, and I'd only add to that, Jared, that communities might want to be more thoughtful about the education they provide to local bike shops and local mechanics that might start getting into the business of servicing e-bikes or scooters. What we've seen is that, discount e-bikes, low-cost scooters, those do have lithium-ion batteries that are often really cheap and definitely not utility grade, definitely not monitored for safety. They're often not stored in safe ways or places. They're often maintained in buildings, frequently stacked on one another. So there's a variety of different inappropriate and irresponsible uses of battery technology that will probably happen in your communities. But it's not the utility managed stuff. It's really going to be the consumer technologies that pile up and accumulate and are popular with consumers. But then when those things need to be serviced, they tend to stick around a while and maybe get overcharged, etc. So that's an opportunity for more education and more focus.
Yeah, and I will note that the Electric Power Research Institute actually tracks all of the battery fires across. They do it globally. They certainly do it within the United States, And since 2012, there have been, I think, 22 battery fires that have been identified. And obviously, as more get deployed, it's going to happen more frequently. But last year in 2023, with the rapid increase we saw, there were 7 across the nation. I made a note because I was doing research about other forms of energy storage and the rate of explosion or fire that you see from them. And I noted that the average number of grain silos that blows up every year is 7.8. And of course, if you start talking about things like gasoline stations, propane accidents, etc., not that that's ever a good thing, or that we want to use that as a benchmark, but there is a risk profile that you need to assign to it. And I think that it's really all the questions you're asking about safety and health and environmental standards are all great ones to ask, but you do need to ask them for real rather than rhetorically. This is what we see. This is what we see always when we work on wind and solar is people ask a question and they think they already know the answer. They're just asking it rhetorically. In fact, they're good questions. What does happen when a battery, when you have a thermal runaway at a battery system? And that's a good question, and you need to listen to the response. Most of the thermal runaway events, the way they have the containers around the utility scale, the BESS kind of systems, are contained within that facility. And only when it really gets out of control and the container itself starts to be breached, that you have a problem. And that's actually fairly rare. Most of the 22 battery fires that there have been since 2012, most of them were contained, and then those same systems were fixed and renewed. So that it wasn't like it destroyed the entire battery even. It was just an incident that happened that caused a shutdown, and it was noted in the press. So so there are some real things, and the there are some places. Well, and as battery chemistries change, the particular risk will change. We do see, for instance, a technology that's now growing in acceptance and application, although don't know if it's really quite at market readiness, is the flow battery. And that's where there's actually an electrolyte that flows from one container into another in order to, and it is recharged. So there's actually a liquid that's flowing. It's actually a very low risk battery, but it has a liquid. So there's different. What happens if the containers break? You have to have a exterior container function. You don't really need that for a lithium battery for the most part. I would defer to the fire protection safety standards on that, but different kinds of technologies will require different kinds of attention to some of those environmental issues, as you just noted.
Okay, really quick, because I know it's 2:31. Do they make any noise? Do they hum? Do they vibrate? Real quick.
They are space conditioned. If you noted on the pictures in the slides,
Yeah.
a lot of them, they have air conditioning units on them, right? Or ventilation units. They do make some noise associated with that. So there are some, you might want to have a noise standard like you would for any other thing that would be space conditioned, right? I mean, the kind of standards that we are typically put into our ordinances are probably appropriate for that kind of use.
Okay. All the pictures seem to show them as white. Do they have to be white? And to that, very quickly, are there any other aesthetic things that you have seen folks or residents talk about aside from the glaring white, which might actually have a very legitimate reason?
What do you think, Jared? Can I get out there with my spray paint?
Well, I will say, I think they're white, again, trying to keep them cool in the summer, right?
Yeah.
So that's why they're white. We have talked about doing like a vinyl wrap on one to try to make it a little more, pleasant to look at. Generally, these are so far have not been installed in kind of high traffic areas, so the aesthetics haven't been, white has been nice to blend in to, be kind of boring back there. And then, yeah, I think that'd be an opportunity. We see folks that want to paint our transformers in their neighborhood and put some flowers on the side or something like that. Maybe we can make this a community project.
Very last thing, and
well,
it might be hard.
I will note that some of the existing ordinances that I didn't go over this piece, a lot of them do have screening requirements, which are sometimes applied to things like substations or other electrical equipment as well. But there are some places that have screening requirements, and then conversely, there's a screening requirement around it, but then there is a necessary gap on any vegetation that you're using between the battery and the vegetation that has to be maintained. Obviously, you don't want to have, put up some nice trees to screen it and have the branches grow immediately on the containment facility and become a vector for if there is an event for transfer of heat and fire.
Last question. I don't know if this is something that you can really answer, but if a community was to bring one of these in, how many new jobs might we expect from this? Nothing? My last question,
I mean,
and I get crickets.
it's a construction project. So, I mean, I would think, for the size that we're looking at, it's maybe 24 for a season. And then there's
How
a
about
group that
maintenance, I
yeah, I was
guess,
about to say, then
long
there's a
term?
group that does routine maintenance. And so, it's kind of a budding industry of folks that are making the rounds, doing the routine maintenance on these. One of the reasons we like them is that there's not a lot of maintenance to do. So, maybe that is a slightly negative economic development, jobs piece there. So sorry,
Okay.
that's the reality of
Yeah,
it.
That's fine.
and yeah, the economic development aspect is going to be in the development part of it, right? It's in building them. It's like building homes, right? I mean, all construction jobs are temporary, right? But as long as we're always going to need homes, we're always going to have a construction industry. And it's the same thing here, is that we have a burgeoning industry. There's going to be pretty dramatic expansion over the next few 30 years. So there will be job creation. However, there's not somebody on site maintaining it every day, kind of as that's their job to do.
I think
So it
that
doesn't
was
create
the
that kind of job.
question.
Right.
For
Yeah.
there were several questions about that. Like, is it manned by someone 9 to 5 or remotely 9 to 5, whatever. Okay. All right. We got to wrap up. We're already like 5 minutes over. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists and of course for Carla and the group that puts on this series. We appreciate you. Don't forget to log those CM credits. You can get all the information, the recording link, all the things on our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. We have a ton of webinars scheduled already for just the next two months alone. So be sure to check out our website for upcoming sessions. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll talk next time. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.